Today we're going to be talking about our 6-shooter hinge applicator and how to dry set it and troubleshoot. To check your pocket after it's routed to make sure it's centered in your H-block, you want to grab a measuring tool and measure from one side 1 inch to the edge of the pocket, and then the other side 1 inch to the pocket to make sure the pocket's centered inside the H-block. After, you're going to grab a hinge and you're going to place it inside the pocket and look to make sure the pre-drills are lined up in the holes in the hinge. After confirming that the pocket is centered in the H-block, now we'll be able to bring the 6-shooter over and adjust the height. And to do so, there's adjustment on the all thread that you see here, 2 of them, and then a total of 8 5/16 hex bolts on slots that we're going to loosen up and make the adjustment for the height. And to check your height of your 6-shooter, after running a pocket with a pre-drill sequence selected, you're going to run your 6-shooter inside the pocket and actuate it. After actuating into your 6-shooter, you're going to hit your reset button and it's going to retract, and it's going to leave 6 marks from the Phillips screws, and that will tell you which direction to adjust your 6-shooter height. So to make our adjustment on our height in the 6-shooter, I find that's easier if you actuate your 6-shooter inside the pocket so it sits on the downward position to make your adjustments and make your height adjustment as well. After running your 6-shooter and determining which direction you need to go with your 6-shooter, up or down, you're going to go to your 5/16 bolts located upside on the slots location on your 6-shooter and loosen up your bolts. And after, you're going to go down on the jam nuts on the old thread and loosen up the jam nuts as well. After loosening up the jam nuts on the top side of the old threads, you're going to have 2 extra jam nuts locked into the L-angle bracket. Those are going to be the jam nuts that are actually going to adjust your height of your 6-shooter up or down. So if you need to go up, you'll crack the top side jam nut loose on both sides. And then you will loosen or tighten down the jam nut on the bottom to either lower or raise your 6-shooter. This way. After setting your 6-shooter height, make sure your gearbox is leveled inside your pocket. To check your left and right center placement of your 6-shooter inside the pocket, you're going to use the same method that you set your 6-shooter to determine its height. To make your adjustment left to right on your 6-shooter, you're going to start by taking off the brass plate and adding or removing shim. After removing your brass plate and looking at your shim that you have in the mount, you gotta determine which direction you gotta go according to the left to right in your 6-shooter. But one thing you need to know is that the screw receiver block needs to be centered inside your H-block. So the same amount of shim on one side is going to equal to the same amount in the opposite side. If you need to add shim, then you'll grab a piece of shim, cut to the shape of the brass, and added through the flat screw and then bolted back on. Now you're going to end up doing the same thing on the opposite side and have the same amount of shim, so both sides are even and centers the screw receiver block inside the H block. Another method to determine your 6-shooter height, if in case you don't have a gem or a door available at the moment, is that you can run your 6-shooter inside your H block and drive the driver with the Phillips screw tips and actuate it forward and check the height from the rear tips to the bottom Phillips screw. After actuating your 6-shooter and locking it inside the pocket and driving the gearbox forward, you're going to take your ruler and place it next to the very bottom Phillips screw tip and look for a 5/8 measurement from the rear tips to the center of the tip. After taking your measurement off the rear tips to the center of the Phillips screw tip, on head 4, you're going to repeat the same process on head 1 to determine the height and level of the trolley above you. After setting our height and our left to right on our 6-shooter, the next thing to do is set our angle. First, you want to start by placing a spacer that's 3/8 thick between the screw receiver block and your H block so you can set it inside the pocket. And then you're going to turn off the air on the hook latch so it's easier to place the 6-shooter inside the pocket. Next, you're going to place your 6-shooter inside the H block while resting on top of the 3/8 spacers. After placing your 6-shooter inside the H block, you're going to grab a 5000 shim and push it against between the spacer and the screw receiver block to make sure it does not go through. And you like to repeat the same process on the opposite side. If there is a gap between your spacer and the screw receiver block, to make that angle adjustment, you're going to loosen up your collars on top of the shaft with a 3/16 Allen and move your carriage either forward or back. After loosening up the collar, you're going to loosen up the set screws located on the top of the plates and the back of the plate on both sides. After moving the carriage above, forward or back, you're going to check again with your 5000 shim between the spacer and the screw receiver block to make sure there is no gap. And the last thing after you set your angle in your 6-shooter is to make sure that you tying it down all your collars on your shaft and that your dimension between your back plate to your wheel on both sides are even or the same so your carriage rolls smoothly on your overhead. And lastly, you want to retract your 6-shooter up and turn on your air back on your 6 gearbox. Now that we've finished setting our 6-shooter inside our H block, we're going to set our flow control speeds on our screwdriver so when it plunges in, it plunges into a speed where it does not obstruct the screws from dropping all the way inside the screwdriver. And to do so, you will adjust the flow controls located on the side of the cylinder, and by adjusting the flow or the knob to your right, you will slow, and to your left, you will speed up the cylinder stroke. The flow control located on the back cylinder controls the airflow or speed when the gearbox plunges inside the screw receiver block. The flow control located on the front side of the cylinder controls the retract of the gearbox. While controlling or adjusting the flow controls of the cylinder, what you're looking for is when it plunges forward, you want it to be a smooth, fast transition, but not too fast or too slow where it's going to obstruct the screws from properly dropping inside the screw receiver block. When retracting, you want it to be as quick and smooth so you can readjust as quickly and go and apply a hinge to the following hinge pocket. Now that we set the flow controls on our screwdriver, the next thing we're going to do is make sure that we set the proper distance on our forward-reverse stop bolt. To do that, you're going to grab your tape and measure from the back of the angle bracket 1.5 inches to the top of the bolt. And after, you're going to measure 1.5 inches from the top of the bolt to the limit switch. But if you need to make any sort of adjustment on the bolt, all you need to do is loosen up the jam nut and turn in or out the direction that you want to. After making your adjustments on the reverse forward limit switch, you're gonna make adjustments on the stop limit switch with the turret. And to do so, you wanna start with first making sure your turret is set on the yellow tape beforehand, as you can see, and turning that towards the limit switch direction, and then measuring 1.5 inches from that bolt to the limit switch arm. After making your adjustments on your stop limit switch, you're gonna run your six shooter a couple times and make any further adjustments on the limit switch arm while loosening the socket cap screw, but do not adjust the bolts on the turret. And lastly, you're going to want to make sure that your hook latch bracket located in your H block is set right, so your screw receiver block with your six shooter latches and properly sits inside the pocket tightly so there's no wiggle room. But if your six shooter feels loose after latching inside the H block, to tighten it down, you will either move forward or back the hook latch bracket. To make your adjustments for your six shooter on the hook latch bracket, you're going to go and loosen up the 9/16 bolts and either move the bracket forward or back to get rid of the wiggle. And after making your adjustment, you're going to go ahead and tighten it back all down.